Okay, hello everyone. So I take it that we can begin while some of the others join us. So hopefully it is that you're able to see me and hear me clearly. All right, that's good to know. All right, so my talk today, I'm going to try to be as uh, quick as possible in talking about this. So this is a talk on abstractifying the curriculum. This is something that we definitely do not want to do. And we're going to look at a particular approach to assessment design. And given that our theme this week is about passion, I'm going to try to talk about passion a little bit in the talk. Now, it's not uncommon, first of all, to hear students, you know, ask questions in terms of, why do I need to learn this? What is the benefit of doing that? How does this help me in the real world? And perhaps these are some of the questions that we might have asked ourselves in our time as students, but they're valid questions. And, just looking at some data here, focusing on the local context in Vietnam, a particular news story caught my attention a couple of years back when it stated that young people are very much so concerned with food security, stable jobs, something to eat, and having a stable career. And they tend to pay less attention to um, public issues like corruption and climate action. And there was some interesting data that was also published alongside the news article. But the data actually came from the British Council's Next Generation report on Vietnam. A very interesting report. It gives some very interesting insights in terms of millennials and Gen Z in Vietnam. One thing stood out to me is that the report stated that most interviewees felt disconnected from broader national issues and that they craved the ability to speak openly about issues seen in society. They wanted to have a voice. And this really led me to think about some of what we do here at the university, especially given the fact that we are an Australian institution operating in Vietnam. And, you know, understanding that these are two very, very different contexts. Extractifying the curriculum is something that we do not want to do. Instead, we want to localize it. So moving whatever we do in terms of teaching and learning from the standpoint of generalization and adapting it where appropriate is something that I think would be quite beneficial to us in terms of a standard practice. Now, there are some very good reasons why localizing the curriculum is good. Of course, it helps with helping students to make sense of what we teach, especially given the fact that we're in a transnational educational environment. We also want to ensure that whatever we deliver has industry relevance, of course, but beyond that, that there's a broader societal impact. And this is because, and this kind of harkens back to the plenary session that we had this morning, students are not just consumers. Sometimes we tend to think of the education model as something being just purely transactional. And there's that dimension to it. There's that neoliberal sort of perspective. I don't think that that's something that we can get away from. The dollars and cents of education is something that is, we're all subjects of neoliberalism to some extent. But the students that we teach, they are also citizens. They are also the future leaders of the country. They're also workers. They're humans. And a lot of what we do in terms of, teaching and learning at university, knowledge production, that sort of thing, we're really engaged in what I would call human capital development, where the focus isn't just on developing the future workforce, but we also have to take into account issues of citizenship and issues of social mobility as well. When it is that we look at what we do at the university and the social contract that we have with the students and with the country that we're in, especially for us who are foreign academics and foreign members of staff. Now, I want to draw your attention to scenario-based assessments or scenario-based learning. And there's a lot of literature on this where it has been implemented in a variety of different contexts. So there's a lot that you can find if it is that you do a Google Scholar search on scenario-based assessment or scenario-based learning. Sometimes it's called that. And when we look at what a scenario is, in terms of the standard definition, a scenario is a written outline or a sequence of events or a particular setting, right? And as it relates to scenario-based learning, this really has to do with the use of scenarios as a vehicle for students as they go through the teaching and learning process, because it provides students with the opportunity to learn from and apply their learning in realistic experiences. So scenarios in this regard may be a particular set of circumstances, a critical incident, or a narrative. So the benefit of using scenario-based assessments or engaging in scenario-based learning has to do with providing context to tasks, which again is very, very important. It helps us to enable critical thinking. It helps us to reinforce disciplinarity, which sometimes is probably much more difficult for students to grasp than the task itself. Sometimes students may be very good at learning how to engage with a task, but they don't understand disciplinarity. Again, this is why context matters. And again, scenario-based learning is something that facilitates authentic assessment, as this is one of the approaches to teaching and learning that causes us to really stand out here at the university. So I want to draw your attention to a case study here. Now, this is a course that I coordinate. This is a first year double credit course. It's called Professional Communication Foundations. It's taught on the Professional Communication program. It's a media and communications theory course. Usually for practical courses, students are much more likely to see the relevance of whatever it is that you teach. And again, a lot of this depends on the nature of the program and also the nature of the discipline. But generally speaking, for theory courses, students are often not inclined towards understanding or liking theory courses. They find that the theory courses are unnecessarily difficult. There's the misconception that with theory courses, you have to memorize everything, which isn't the case. But with this example here, as I go through this brief case study, all the assessments, there are 3 assessments for the course, they're linked through a unified scenario. And all these are scaffolded assessments, meaning that they build one on top of the other, and they're all linked to the learning outcomes of the course, right? So in terms of the scenario, yes, Glenn. This course is also taught in Melbourne in the professional communication program as well. So yeah, that's correct. So with this sample scenario here that I'll go through, the outcomes that need to be presented are there's a presentation that the students have to conduct. So the group assignment is actually the first assignment that they have to do. It's a discourse analysis. Second, it's a case study that they will have to do following this, and then an individual reflection. So with this scenario here, I want to break it down. So it is that you're able to see all of the working parts of the scenario, but the scenario is different from the assessment task. The assessment task provides, all of the details in terms of what they are expected to do, what, they are supposed to do. But the scenario gives them context, so they don't just have floating tasks. And this is especially important for courses that are quote unquote less practical. And even for practical courses, it gets them to think in much more structured and much more critical ways. So before it is that we do an analysis here, we just want to look at some of the basic elements of the scenario that is presented here. 1, it's based on a real world entity, so it's not something that's made up. 2, there are statements of purpose that give clarity and context to the following tasks. There are elements of disciplinarity to really ground the learners in terms of what they're doing and to understand, you're studying a particular discipline. There are certain ways in which it is that you would engage with certain concepts or speak about certain things. And sometimes this is something that is very easy to go over students' heads. So we always have to remind them that you're studying within a particular discipline, right? There's a call to action, and there are hyperlinks for keywords or key phrases, key ideas. So in this scenario here, and I'll read it through very briefly, Engaging with Vietnam is an annual international conference aimed at understanding the discourses that shape contemporary Vietnam. This event is a space for creating open dialogue on issues and opportunities in relation to the nation's current affairs. The organizers maintain that understanding this local context involves looking carefully, and critically at the ways knowledge is produced. Your role as a participant in this event is to critically analyze examples of media and communications practice and produce purposeful research that can be used for policy and practice across a wide range of fields. This year's theme engages with knowledge production in the age of metrics and global rankings. Participants are invited to present work which engages with the conference theme in addition to several other key areas of interest, including, and there's a list that follows. So I didn't include the list, but Engaging with Vietnam is a real world entity. This year is the 13th annual convention. It's actually, it will be in week 1 of the next semester held in Ho Chi Minh City. So there's a link to the Engaging with Vietnam website. In terms of the statement of purpose, it gives them a sense as to, okay, what this event is supposed to be about. In terms of the elements of disciplinarity, I specifically mentioned, okay, you have to provide examples of media and communications practice, not business practice, not advertising, not PR, not engineering, not some other type of discipline, especially given the nature of this real world entity. In terms of the call to action, this is directed towards students. They are required to produce purposeful research that can be used for policy and practice across a wide range of fields, given the fact that media and communications research is interdisciplinary in nature. And then it is that there are links, hyperlinks to very key things that students should know about. This is also included in the assignment task as well. So there's a link to the Engaging with Vietnam website. There's also a link to to the theme for this year, where it is that the theme is actually explained. And then other areas of interest involve other themes that they can do their assignments on. So the benefits of this particular approach is that, one, it aids in local knowledge production. It helps students to be much more reflexive in their approach to learning. It helps at least in fostering social responsibility. I've had many students say that it got them really to think critically about things that they often take for granted, or to be much more engaged with social issues and that sort of thing. And it's an opportunity to encourage both creativity and innovation. So there are some caveats here. When designing a scenario, this is only one part of assessment design. And assessments need to be aligned with the specifics of one's discipline, the course one is teaching, and the learning outcomes. Details of how students would be assessed should be included as part of the rubric, with as much detail as possible. And in designing scenarios, with the aim of localizing the curriculum, it does require a certain measure of creativity and experimentation and iteration, because there's some things that you'll have to revise, in the case that something that, doesn't really work the way that you think it would. Perhaps, there's something that you write that might be a source of confusion for learners. So there has to be a very delicate balance in terms of presenting a scenario in very conversational language, something that's easy to understand, but that actually prompts the learners towards thinking very critically about a topic. So it helps them to not produce generic work. There's a big difference between looking at a topic and looking at the topic contextually, in very broad terms. So, I will more or less end my talk here, and probably leave the next 15 minutes or so for question and answer. But there's a question I like to throw out in terms of, what makes higher education in Vietnam very different to vocational education or skills training. And I think this is a broader question for us as stakeholders in higher education. If we focus a lot on skills development, what else perhaps gets lost in the process? What else do we miss out on? And this is partly why I find scenario-based assessments very compelling and something that, you know, it helps us make that distinction between higher education and different forms of education, where it enables learners to think in much more complex ways. All right, so that's the end of my talk. So, well, I guess the floor is open for any questions or comments folks might have.